And so the headline of Colin Williscroft from Farmers Weeklies in the Newsmaker section this week, the headline reads, "New role, a baptism of fire." I think it's aptly framed for our next guest, who walked into the head position of the Meat Industry Association and joins us now on Sirmas Country. Welcome to Sirmas Country, Sirma. It's been a very, very crazy, busy time for you in this new role.
Oh, it most certainly has been, and thank you, Sarah, for inviting me to join you on your podcast. And very exciting. This is my first podcast ever, so yay! But yeah, no, certainly it's been a baptism by fire, and I don't see this letting up in the near future. But what doesn't break you makes you stronger is my motto.
Hey, so let's start off but we really want to get into the guts of what's happening in these Zoom rooms across the country with our processors, beef and lamb, meat industry association, to give advice out to farmers. But let's get to know you first. A wonderfully diverse accent there. Whereabouts did you grow up and go through your career to get to a position like this?
Yeah, well, I'm a bit of an international person. I was born in Bulgaria, but I spent my youth in Africa, predominantly in Tanzania and Zimbabwe. My parents, my mum in particular, was working there as an architect, building medical stores and low-cost clinics for an aid program. And then I spent a bit of time in Denmark, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, I guess, as a young, fancy-free teenager, and then moved to New Zealand to do my university at Massey University in Palmerston North, of all places.
And then heading into the Ministry of Economic Development recently to then move into, so your background in trade, tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so part of the reason for joining Massey was at the time they had a really strong international business program, and that's always been a strong interest of mine, international business law, management, and the likes. And they also had a very strong international students program, so a lot of support around international students. And of course, I was one of those international students coming into New Zealand. So the role at the Ministry for Economic Development, which subsequently became the mega Ministry of MBIE, really was a junior analyst or an entry-level analyst to get my feet under the table and understand the workings of government, the machinery of government, how it all operates, and the likes. And then very quickly after that, I moved into trade-facing roles, working on the Trans-Tasman desk, working on the Australia-New Zealand relationship, and a review of a very fundamental piece of trade architecture that exists there. And then from then moved on into trade negotiations, and I think I've had my finger in many trade negotiation pies, so to speak, from the China agreement through to Malaysia, Taiwan or Chinese Taipei, Hong Kong, and more recently RCEP, and certainly the TPP or the CPTPP as it became known. So yeah, long history in trade, and it's certainly an area that lights my fire. And moving into the meat industry, of course, we are the second largest export earner for New Zealand with a huge international focus. And really those international markets are fundamentally important to the success of the industry and the sector as a whole, and a huge contributor to New Zealand's economic well-being as well.
So you've obviously listened to Mel Crode's analysis and market commentary there earlier. What do you make of China reopening and that being the hope to this backlog of throughput that we need to process at the moment?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly the markets have been very unusual, and you cannot predict what's happening from one day to the other. You would know that early in February, at the end of January, early February, we saw a lot of disruption in the China market as it shut down due to COVID. And then in March, it started reopening. Now we're seeing a little bit more of that going back to business, going back to normal. And we are very hopeful that it will continue to do so, because we're now seeing on the other side of the world, the US markets starting to get a little bit unstuck, and there's disruption there with cold storage issues, with plants closing down because of COVID-19 outbreaks amongst the workforce and the like. So, it's really positive that China is starting to pick up again, and we're hoping that as people come out of lockdown, they will start to celebrate. And Chinese tend to celebrate with food, and food is what we produce, and it is good quality food. So hopefully that's a real opportunity for us to get back into that market and to continue to service those needs and demands from the Chinese consumers.
So here at home, there has been some varying messaging coming out of the different processes, Sirma, and I know that you have in the last couple of days been at the table to ensure that some consistency in the processing protocols is worked on with MPI, and an email is going out to farmers, a joint press release tonight. Could you give us a bit of an understanding of how we can speed up that chain whilst keeping these workers safe?
Well, that's right. Sarah, of course, when we went into lockdown, the industry moved incredibly quickly to put in place a very robust and stringent protocol, the alert level 4 meat processing protocol, and that was really targeted at keeping workers safe first and foremost, making sure that workers have the confidence to come to work and to continue to do their jobs, while at the same time keeping the processing lines and the processing companies operating, and keeping the jobs going and the like. So, but in order to do that, in order to implement those protocols and that stringent level of hygiene and safety, companies had to look at the capacity issue, and it certainly meant that there was a reduction in capacity. I think ovine capacity went down to 50%, and we saw bovine or beef capacity fall back 30% to 70%. So there was a slowdown, of course, because people were spaced due to the social distancing rules. People were spaced more widely. There was less workforce on site and the likes. Now that we are listening to the government's predictions or guidelines, I think, as to what alert level 3 might look like, we are in the process of discussing what that would look like in practice on the processing floor. And again, the driving consideration has to be the worker safety and preventing the spread of the COVID-19 disease. So, that cannot be underestimated. And, companies all want to do the best that they can to help alleviate the anxiety of their workforce and coming into work. The question, though, is, what do the government guidelines tell us in terms of how those processing lines can be configured? And we're looking very closely at the distancing requirements and what we're allowed to do with shorter distances between workers, and whether that might in fact provide a little bit more flexibility for companies to increase their throughput and their capacity.
Understand 100%.
But I'd like to say,
yeah. Sorry,
but I'd like to say that despite the constraints under level 4, we have seen companies look to make marginal improvements wherever they can to alleviate some of that pressure on the capacity issue, because their stakeholders, the farmers that they work with, are in a real bind at the moment, and I think the companies are certainly very mindful of that and working very hard to try and manage it as best as they can.
Yeah, I understand completely around worker safety, 100%. But if we've got a extremely stressed, frustrated farmer watching right now who's getting through sort of 5% of his normal kill rate, going into extremely tight feed situations going into the winter, is there a way that the message is getting through to government that this part of the industry is extremely suffering and there's massive animal welfare issues going on out there? They're bailing out the airlines, they're bailing out media. I've just, is that strong message getting through that that this is really starting to hurt, and there's a heap of things going on right now for farmers to be able to navigate decision making when no one's buying store stock, and it's getting really hard. We're going over to moving day coming up soon. We've got Ian Bovis, of course, sitting there driving this as well. I think the main question there, Sirma, is are you having those frank conversations to government level?
Well, I mean, I'd like to assure you and your listeners that we certainly are having those conversations, both from the MIA perspective as well as our colleagues in Beef and Lamb New Zealand and Dairy New Zealand. Our voice has not been silent in talking to government about the pressures that the sector as a whole, both sides of the farm gate, are experiencing, and where we want government to step up and help us to navigate the challenges that we're facing at the moment. So, if farmers are uncertain about wait times or processing times, the only thing I can suggest at this point in time is to have those conversations with their processors to get the most up-to-date information, because it changes. It really does from day to day. Processors are constantly making tweaks to help manage that pressure point for their stakeholders, for farmers, and to keep operating as fast and as much capacity as they can. So I would certainly encourage farmers to talk to, pick up the phone and call your processing company and get the real and most up-to-date information.
Thank you so much for joining us, Sirma. Thank you so much for having the guts and the courage to walk into this role. I know you've got this. And we wish you all the best, because it's certainly not a role that a lot of people would have taken on. And of course, an amazing predecessor of Tim Ritchie that did a great job as well. And with your background that you've just explained, I know that you'll go very, very well. So thank you for taking the time.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity. And I look forward to being able to continue this conversation with you in the future.
Thank you. Absolutely. It's Sirma Karapeeva, the new CEO of Meat Industry Association.
This is Sarah's Country.